Doug Howard from Growth Team Strategies with Kathi Fleck, one of our premier consultants. And we are here today with our podcast, Selling the Dream, to continue to talk about different aspects of getting your business ready to sell, challenges you might encounter along the way, and strategies that, we've encountered some in our own experiences, some of the clients that we've worked with for getting around that and getting these businesses to the point where they're sellable and they're actually sold. Kathi, how are you today?
I'm doing fine. How about you?
I'm doing fine. I drove Ferraris last weekend, so I'm feeling like the rest of things are moving rather slowly now, but I'm doing fine. I recommend it for everyone.
You have a Boeing shirt on, so are you also thinking about airplanes?
I did, yeah, because the Ferraris didn't go fast enough, so I thought, well, we'll be faster than that. We'll be an airplane. But so we, when people start to think about selling their business, and we've kind of talked about this before, right? The whole question of, do I even have a sellable business? And I think there are a lot of people out there, sort of the naysayers out there that'll say, yeah, you can't sell a business if it's, got your name on it, or you can't sell a business if it's, just you and a handful of people, or if it's located at your house, or lots of different things. And a lot of times those turn out to just not be true. It depends a lot on how you do it. So you experienced some of that, Kathi, when you had your business, right?
I did. First of all, I didn't even think I could sell the business because having a remodeling company was not one that seemed to be prime for selling. So that was one of the thoughts. But I just kind of went past that and still found that I could sell it. But then even with the business on the market and being with some of my peer groups, they were thinking it wasn't going to sell for what I was hoping to get for it. So it was kind of discouraging when others were talking about not being able to sell or really get what you wanted for it. And so what I had to do is just kind of move them out of my range and put blinders on so that I could keep going forward. Otherwise,
yeah, I think it's hard because, for most of us, we haven't sold businesses until we do. Mm-hmm. So when people that seem like they know what they're talking about say, yeah, you can't do that, it's hard not to take that, fairly seriously, right?
Mm-hmm. And I felt I would have probably been discouraged by it and maybe accepted something less or not continued the momentum that I was building to sell. Plus, it was during COVID, so those circumstances kind of threw me in a little different spiral as well.
Yeah. So what were some of the reasons why people thought you couldn't sell yours? I mean, obviously the remodeling, has kind of that question of, well, do we have anything that's really recurring, or once a project's done, is it done? That's somewhat industry specific, but what else did you encounter?
Well, I was really the face of the company. So I wore a lot of hats, and not only was I the salesperson, but I oversaw all of the administrative and the designing part. So my hands were in a lot of pots, and I think I even was wondering about how that might work as well. I had to find somebody who was interested in the components that I did have and not really worry about all the hats that I wore.
Yeah. One of the things I'll hear from people when they're thinking about selling is, my company is named after me. It's ABC. It's Doug Howard Construction, or whatever it happens to be, and they'll question whether or not they need to change that before they sell. In general, that doesn't really bother me very much as long as the company has a really good reputation, And I feel like people tend to forget that some of the epic companies that are out there, companies that have survived hundreds of years, or at least over 100 years, companies like Disney and Kraft and those things, those were all people's names, right? I mean, those were all, and of course you think back to someone like Disney, right? I mean, he did the animation, he did the drawing, he did the business deals, he hosted the television show, and the thought of, well, without you, what would you have to sell? And today he probably wouldn't even recognize his own company, right?
Yeah, I never thought about that, but that is a good point, because when you think of Disney, you think of the whole gamut of the company, not just Walt Disney, although he was the big face of the business.
Yeah. And I think there have been a lot of companies, like that, where, so of course, obviously we're probably not going to grow our businesses to the size that Disney did, but there are some lessons to be learned.
Hmm.
Some of those we capture in that value builder assessment we do when we look at some of the things that make a company more sellable, like not being the only face of the business or having more processes that other people can do, that kind of thing. So, what were some of the strategies that you employed, Kathy? Because I know there were some specific things you did to make the company sellable.
Yeah, mostly putting the processes in place. And that was a difficult challenge for me at the beginning. I didn't really know. It seemed overwhelming. I didn't really know where to go with it. But I would just take one at a time. So something that might be an irritant that wasn't quite working for a client or for me or for my staff, I would then put a process in it. So if you think about remodeling and change orders, sometimes people figured that a change order should have just been part of the job and they didn't want to pay extra for it. And people would tell me to go ahead with it and then be surprised when I gave them a bill. So I had to put together a change order process, which I asked for them to sign and went over with them when we signed the contract. And that really solved that issue. But I would just take one incident at a time that became kind of a difficult matter and just put a process together. So
Yeah,
that helped the company to run a lot smoother and also was more sellable when potential buyers saw that there were things in place that could help them.
sure. Yeah. Yeah, and I think one thing that we've seen people do effectively, sometimes when they have a successor already identified, other times when they know they're going to be selling, is just to make some of the other team members more visible, right? I tell people even when if you're going to transition a business to, a family member, it unsettles some people to think that someone was, the front desk clerk or driving the delivery truck and then became president of the company. Right?
Mhm.
So as they're moving along, we want to be elevating, the role they have, the title they have, how they're represented on the website, those kinds of things.
And that's
Uh,
yeah, and I did have that on my website too. There was a picture for each of the staff members, not the subcontractors, but the staff members with
yeah,
their background in there so people could actually see that there was more than just me.
yeah. I think it's important for people to realize too that, when someone's buying a business, they're really buying two things, right? They're buying the ongoing cash flow or the promise of future or the hope of future revenue and a way of doing business, right?
Mhm.
I mean, those are essentially, so some of that's reputation, some of that is, the connections that we have in any industry. But people say, well, in some industries we just don't have like, and I hear this a lot with service businesses, people that have businesses that do websites or marketing or anything, and it's like, well, look, once the last project's done, there's no guarantee there's more business coming. And I try to remind them that, like, when you buy the pizza shop up the end of the street, no one is contractually obligated to come in and buy a pizza the next day.
Right.
Right. So I think when people realize that, like, if a business has been marketed, if it's got a social media presence and website, and referral sources, and those kinds of things, it's likely to continue. What else? What is there anything else that you did that was sort of helpful? And because your business was on the property uh, where your home was, it wasn't in your home, but it was on the same property.
I had a separate building on my property. A lot of times people want to buy a company and the property or the building and that too. So that was another challenge that we thought we would have to go up against, but it worked out pretty well. I allowed the new buyer to rent the place. I wasn't charging him for it, but that was part of the arrangement. He just paid some utilities and he did that for a few months until he could get himself a new location
Yeah,
as a way to make it easier for him.
yeah. Well, and I think too, in terms of preparation, I know one of the things when we sold our business, the person that bought our accounting practice um, did the same thing, leased an office for us for a period of time, and then moved somewhere else. It was very helpful to have the the business and the building in separate entities,
Hmm.
so that we could really have the right strategy for each one of those. Sometimes I think people want to buy the building or the property because it helps them get financing. A banker is much more excited about real estate or some hard asset, especially when they're buying a business that doesn't have a lot of assets to it.
Hmm.
Um, but a lot of times that's a lot to take on for folks too. And so sometimes it can be helpful, even if you say, we'll give you an option or there's something you can look at down the road, but it doesn't necessarily have to happen all at the same time.
I think anything to make it easier for the new owners to come in and get their business going, they just feel more confident that they can be successful with it.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's funny, a lot of times we'll hear people talk about things like ESOPs, where like the employees end up buying the business, and different things like that. And there's so many different things to explore, which is why we, obviously put a lot of emphasis on doing these things well in advance, putting together that professional team, all the things that we've been talking about on the other episodes of the podcast, because some of the things that can really help just take some time to do.
Right. And I think shows that confidence to a new owner, prospective owner, that they can be successful. They just need to have things in place that they feel that they can just slip into and progress.
Yeah, yeah. And so, so I think it's something that, as people are headed down the path, first of all, they should be aware they're probably going to have some naysayers. Someone's going to tell you that, either the idea of selling the business, or the process you have to go through, or the likelihood of getting the number that you're looking for, are all pretty unlikely to happen. My experience is they are pretty unlikely, but not because they're not likely to happen if you do the right things. It's just because a lot of times folks haven't done the preparation for the right things to have been done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like you said, I think the point you made at the beginning of this conversation is that we haven't done it before. So we don't really know what to expect. We don't have that experience. And so when somebody who comes in and sounds like they have some expertise, and kind of throw us off track, because it is a very stressful process to go through.
Sure.
Running your business and then putting it on the market, making sure things are running smoothly, and all the different components of it.
Yeah. And I think it helps too when we talked about this a little bit before, but when you can kind of identify, or at least picture, who might be the right kind of buyer, or who would be a likely buyer, then I think you can it lends itself to saying, well, if that was the case, maybe someone that doesn't have experience in a particular industry, or maybe I'm in a sales role and maybe the person that buys it is not a salesperson. And when you start to think about, well, what kinds of things would have to be true for that to still be appealing to them, I think it helps us round out the picture. Because I think a lot of these businesses, mine have always been this way. Most of the clients I work with, the businesses kind of reflect who we are, our personalities, what we like, what we don't like, But if the only way to sell a business was to find someone very similar to me, as wonderful a thought as that is, I think it limits very much your buyer base. How applicable the business is to that that many more people. So
Sure.
Because I know the
It
person that bought my business, or we've sold a couple, were very different personalities, and I think the person that bought your business was different perspective, different background, personality, right?
Yeah.
Because sometimes what we think is we're trying to find someone like us,
Yeah. Well, I was thinking that too. You'd have somebody that would be similar, but it was interesting what the prospective buyer was looking for that I had to offer, and it's totally different from me. But there were lots of opportunities for different people to come in and buy it.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So as people are heading down this path, and again, the earlier the better, giving people that window. That's why we talk a lot about 5 years to go. Not everybody has 5 years, but even in a shorter window of time, you can address a lot of these things. But first and foremost, you have to believe you have a sellable business. It's good to know where you stand and what things will make it more sellable. But then to recognize, not to just get derailed by the first few people that tell you it's not likely to sell, because that doesn't really always turn out to be the case if we do some of the right things.
Well, one thing I forgot to mention is that I think if you do take the areas that may be concerns for people, such as wearing all the hats, figure out a way to handle that when you're dealing with potential buyers, so that they can you're not thrown off kilter when they're asking you questions. You can present to them a solution for them to handle. I think that's part of being prepared for that.
Yeah, and I think I mentioned the Value Builder that we're certified in. That's a really great program. One of the things with that assessment is it scores companies in 8 areas, and each of those 8 areas really are the kinds of things that would tend to make a buyer more or less comfortable about the business, depending on kind of where you are,
Right.
how dependent you are on one employee or one supplier, how volatile cash flow is. Things that if you say, no, we've got these things pretty well laid out, it takes a lot of that worry off the table.
True. True.
All right, Kathi, well, thanks so much for spending some time today. And hopefully folks are out there thinking about selling their business. And, I think there's a tremendous amount of business opportunity out there. But I think a lot of businesses go unsold and value goes unrecognized just because people maybe hear right from the get-go, it can't be done.
Yeah, I don't think about it.
Yeah. All right. Well, Kathi, thanks again. I'm Doug Howard, Growth Team Strategy, Selling the Dream, and we will be back with more episodes in not too long, sometime soon. Have a great day, Kathi.
Thank you for listening to the Selling the Dream podcast, starring Doug Howard and Kathi Fleck. Both Doug and Kathi have built and sold successful businesses and hope this podcast will help other small business owners do the same. Tune in every week to hear more tips for increasing the value of your company so you get the highest return for your years of hard work when it comes time to sell or transition your business. Can't wait till next week? Check out our website for more information at www.growththemes.com.